Hello and welcome to another episode of Pakistonomy. My name is Uzair, and today I have with me Zarrar Khuhro, who needs no introduction. He's host of the show Zara Hat Kay, writes a frequent column in Dawn, very active in social media as both Amirul Centristeen and the creator of the Tamgai Che. So Zarrar, thank you
Thank
for joining us and taking out the time.
and thank you very much for listing what will undoubtedly be my only enduring legacy. Is the Tamkha. I hope to be remembered by future generations.
I think you made your dent in the universe or the
I'd like
larger
to,
universe.
I'd like to think that there's a small Tamkha shaped dent in the universe. Yeah.
तो शुरू करते हैं बात हमारी एक व्हाट्सएप डिस्कशन चल रही थी वीकेंड पे उसी से शुरू करते हैं मैं आज जब सुबह उठा तो सोच रहा था कि बात कहाँ से शुरू की जाए तो ग्रेड स्कूल में पढ़ी थी हमने पेलोपोनेशियन वॉर थुसिडिडीज की तो उसमें वो लिखता है कि जब जंग शुरू होने लगी तो एक बड़ी वजह ये थी कि जो लास्ट जंग के लड़ने वाले लोग थे वो मरना शुरू हो गए वो जनरेशन चली गई तो नई जनरेशन आई तो उसने कहा कि हम अपने तरीके से करेंगे और जंग में ग्लोरी है और ऑनर है तो पेलोपोनेशियन वॉर शुरू हुई उसके बाद जो ग्रीस का हाल हुआ सबको पता है हमारी बात भी इसी तरह चल रही थी कि एक तरह से दुनिया एक रिंस रिपीट साइकिल पे है एंड इट्स अ वेरी डेंजरस टाइम तो पहले तो आई लेट यू एक्सप्लेन व्हाट कंसर्न्स यू अराउंड दैट एंड देन वी कैन talk about where we agree and disagree and where we go from here.
Okay, well, I mean, that's a given, right? I mean, there's this movie which is one of my old favorite movies, and it's called Excalibur. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's a bit of a cult classic. ठीक है तो उसमें एक scene होता है कि when they're like standing there and Arthur's become king, okay, and everybody's all happy, and then Merlin comes in and he's like a bit of a downer, and he gives this whole speech remember this, for it is the curse of men that we forget. So that is our basic nature as a species. Now in some ways it's a good thing, right? The act of forgetting is in many ways critical to moving forward, right? हमारे यहाँ एक और थोड़ा सा मसला हो गया ना उज़ैर कि we are not just forgetting, we are actually rewriting our history to suit our present political social needs. There are alternate history. If you want to just put it charitably, there are alternate histories. For example, take a look at what's happening in India, right? This history of victimhood, which leads directly to the sense that, oh, now is the glorious rebirth of a nation that, perhaps arguably never really existed, right? And that's something you will find in many streams of thought, right? I mean, Islamist thought is filled with the harking back to a golden age. Forget about the reasons that caused that golden age to exist. Forget about how golden that age was. But it creates this wonderful narrative of victimhood, which can then is and will be cynically exploited by modern day demagogues. Again, इसमें कोई नई बात नहीं है, right? I mean, I firmly believe that there's nothing new under the sun. I love to quote Mark Twain on this, right? That history does not repeat itself, but it does rhyme, right? So we are seeing history rhyme all over the place. It doesn't concern me, though, I'll have to tell you that. I mean, it's fascinating to watch it. Sometimes you wish you didn't have to live through it, right? But from an academic point of view, it's interesting to see, don't you think?
I think it is, and I think the one thing that's changed in this, and that to me is concerning more so than just as an observer of this unfold around the world, is the scale and pace at which it is unfolding, right? And it is a generational shift in the sense as well कि एक तो होता है कि fake news है आप उसको you and I can spot it, most people can, my parents sometimes can't, for example. There's a generational gap in that, but there is that fakeness on social media in terms of Instagram at a very young age now, right? Entire sub industries about how to make you look nice. Even Zoom now has a touch up filter. मुझे पता नहीं था, 2-3 दिन पहले किसी ने बताया उसमें टच अप फिल्टर है वो आई मीन तो वो एक तरह से एक फेकनेस जो है वो टेक्नोलॉजी इनेबल कर रहा है उसका स्केल आ रहा है एंड अगेन ये जो ग्लोबल एक मूवमेंट है एक टिल्ट है टुवर्ड्स राइट विंग पॉपुलिज्म वो एक दूसरे से सीख रहे हैं right? Or extract कर रहे हैं चीजें, क्या चलता है क्या नहीं चलता. How much of it do you think is a global phenomenon in terms of that enabled by technology, or do you think it is still a very localized and unique thing across
No,
countries?
it's very much global. It's very much global. I mean, look, I mean, I'm not to agree with you there. Okay? Again, there is nothing new about this. Okay. I mean, fake news, I mean, we like to call it fake news. Call it what it is. It's propaganda, it's disinformation, right? I mean, it can be weaponized in a variety of ways, right? So
Fifth
fake news is a
generation hybrid warfare is actually very
yeah,
old generation warfare.
कोई नई बात नहीं है ना इसमें यार. ठीक है. I mean, you gave the example of the Peloponnesian War. उन जमानों में भी फेक न्यूज और प्रोपेगेंडा घूम रही थी. लेकिन उस वक्त एक बंदे को चिट्ठी लेके भागते हुए जाना होता था दूसरे शहर तक. ठीक है. अब मुझे क्या करना है, मुझे ये करना है, टक 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 and send, right? So we can and you know when you say that like the speed and the scale is different, that is a huge factor, right? Because I mean, about 100, 200 years ago, people used to still say that a lie can circle the globe by the time the truth has put its pants on, right? अब जो झूठ है वो लाइट स्पीड पर ट्रैवल कर रहा है. मतलब मार्स रोवर को पता नहीं कितना टाइम लग गया मरीज पहुंचते पहुंचते. फेक न्यूज ठक ठक आके वापस आ जाएगी, प्रोपेगेंडा ठक ठक आके वापस आ जाएगी. एंड यू नो इट्स नॉट इवन अ क्वेश्चन कि ओ आई एम डिजिटली savvy या मुझे मेरे पास ये टूल है. If you want to believe something, you will believe it. You see, most of the time, it takes a huge effort of will to not believe something that you desperately want to believe. Your brain is actually wired like that. You know what I mean? When you find a piece, and this is an actual study, I can give you a link to it later on if you want, just for kicks. When you find information that confirms your pre-existing beliefs, right? There's a dopamine hit in your brain, very similar to using drugs. Okay, so it's not just a question of fake news, it's a question of your brain on drugs. You are hardwired to believe, right? Now you take that and you multiply, take that on a global scale, and you put that tool in the hands of people who will cynically exploit it. What do you get? You get the world you're living in right now. And buddy, abhi the party shuru hui hai. You see,
अभी
abhi the
पार्टी शुरू हुई है और
all of this technology is still relatively in its infancy. Okay? Now again, look, there is such a thing as the tyranny of the present, right? Okay, I'm sitting here and I'm like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Okay, लेकिन अगर आप पीछे देखो, every single technological innovation ever, right, has given rise to these kind of fears. I mean, I'll give you some slightly unrelated examples. When trains were first introduced in Industrial Revolution England, let's say, right? I have actual articles written by people saying, oh my God, people are going to become mental patients. इतनी तेज कौन travel करेगा? फिर एकदम आप टनल में जा रहे हो, एकदम अंधेरा हो गया, एकदम रोशनी हो गई, you'll go blind. I mean, now you like chuckle at that kind of stuff, right? But at that point, it was a very real and present concern. अब सब लोग ट्रेन में जा रहे हैं, कोई मसला ही नहीं है. So it's possible that that stuff will level out. It's possible. I don't really think so, though. I think it's going to get a lot worse. And I think you are basically in a new age of, sort of neo-fascism and demagoguery, if you ever got out of it in the first place, which again is arguable.
But what? So let me push back on you here. So just look at India, for example, right? And it's next door to Pakistan, has had Modi come in since 2014, consolidate power, etc., etc. We know all of that has happened. But if you look at the legit numbers in historic wins that the BJP has had, वो कोई 35% of the vote है. Population भी नहीं, vote turnout कोई 60 something percent होता है. तो and US में 75 million voted for Trump, but again historic win on the Biden side, 80 plus million votes, record turnout के बावजूद. So when you look at the resistance, quote unquote, in these societies, their numbers are also strong. So why are you of the opinion that it gets a lot worse before it gets better?
I'll push back to your pushback. Opposition to the BJP, political opposition to the BJP, casting a vote to the BJP, in my view, is not resistance to the overall social agenda that is being implemented. Okay, can you hear me? I've lost you.
No, I can hear you. I think the video just froze, but now you're back.
Yeah, my internet is kind of low, not working very well. Dekho, I'm not looking at this in terms of कि यार ये बंदा ये हार गया, election जीत गया है. I am looking at what I see as a historic societal shift. And I'm not even counting it from 2014. I'm counting it from Mahabharata. I'm counting it from the televising of the Mahabharata show, which in turn led to a massive groundswell in this sort of religious feeling. That feeling was then capitalized. I'm looking at Vajpayee and the Rath Yatra. I'm looking at Advani. I am looking at what I see as complete state capture. Okay? So I'm not.
I think I lost you there.
Okay, Trump was, I mean, come on, the man is a complete idiot. He lied with every breath. Yet you still have 71% of Republicans saying they'll vote for him. And that's not in spite of who he is, that is because of who he is, right? So yes, the forces of resistance, I mean, as you call them, I may disagree with that term slightly. Yeah, they exist. But I see the tide not stopping, though. You know, I mean, one swallow does not make a spring for me, man. And abhi to moti hai, boss. This feeling is going to go on for decades. Okay? I mean, I'll give you a small example, right? When the far right gains, the entire political spectrum moves to the right. Okay? Now, even if you don't believe their ideology, you will start catering to it because you need those votes. Okay? Who in India, in the mainstream parties, I mean, call them resistance all you want, who said anything about the Supreme Court's decision to sanctify the Babri Masjid demolition? No one, because they can't afford to, because they will lose the core voter. Okay. On the other hand, I mean, has Modi been good for India on the usual academic metrics that we use? I mean, has the economy improved? Has foreign policy improved? You know, no, none of those things work. Demonetization hit the people the hardest. Yet they will still support him. Why is that? Because he's not there to, you know, give you double-digit GDP growth. That stuff is academic, brother. Okay, he's not there to, for anything else. He is there to restore their manufactured sense of pride. And that is why he gets the votes. That's not going to change. In America, I mean, yeah.
Get on that, because it's a thought before I lose that stream of consciousness. It's something that I've talked to people here in the US that are of the Pakistani diaspora, right? And when they look at what's going on in India, you know, and describe pretty much what you've just described, the question I have for them is, do they then think that, and you're in Pakistan, so I think this is an interesting perspective as a question, do you then think that the rightward tilt and India's illiberal turn in writ large makes Pakistan and Pakistanis talk to their better angels? Or does that make things in Pakistan worse? In the sense that if you are going to have an India that is going after Muslim minorities, does the conversation then in Pakistan pivot and say, look, we don't want to be like that. Let us treat our minorities better, or let us not be the quote unquote Muslim India. Shashi Tharoor likes to use the word Hindu Pakistan, so I will use his term as the Muslim India, and let us fix everything else that has gone wrong on our side over the last few decades. Do you think that leads to a better conversation and create space for it, or not really?
I think in, I lost you there for a minute.
Can you hear me?
Okay, I can hear you now. Yeah, from what I understood, yeah, in many circles there is a conversation. Look, I can't speak for everybody, right? But that does seem to be a strong sentiment, and it certainly seems to be a sentiment in the corridors of power.
Hum te is taraf ke, you know, I think I'm a bit of an optimist in that sense in terms of where the thing is. But I think if I were to use a pop analogy, you would say that this is Lord of the Rings Part 1. और अभी मालूम नहीं है कि मोडोर के पास कितना पावर है, लेकिन पावर ज्यादा लग रहा है और हालात काफी खराब होने वाले हैं.
I would go further than that. I would say that this is the second age of mankind, but Sauron is still coming into power in the first place. Frodo अभी बहुत दूर की बात है. Frodo अभी बहुत दूर की बात है. अभी कोई Frodo नहीं है यहाँ पे. यहाँ पर मतलब छोटे नाज़गुल हैं और बड़े नाज़गुल हैं.
अच्छा।
Take your pick.
और अभी गैंडॉल्फ जो है वो निकला भी नहीं है तलाश में कि कोई मिले जो रिंग को जाके तबाह करे और टेक ऑन करे.
हाँ.
Uh, so from that person, I know you said Pakistan is not batshit crazy. Again, I'll push back on what I see is a very big concern emerging there. It's not fully there, but I think it has the power to fundamentally shape, and it has shaped Pakistan's national security policy in the recent past as well, is the TLP. Usko votes milne lag gaye hain, and I think the difference between the TLP and the TTP, for example, is that the TTP, while it was more militant, it was on the periphery of the country, mostly speaking. TLP is right in Punjab, and it is in Karachi. I know a lot of people in Karachi last election that
Yeah.
voted for the TLP. It has financial backing, etc. Does that How do you see the TLP itself and its sort of meteoric rise under Khadim Hussain Rizvi, and where do you see it going from here? Because it is still contesting elections and it has popularity and it has grassroots support.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I mean, we've been having this conversation for years now, frankly speaking. I mean, look, okay, you can look at it in many ways. If you want to look at it in terms of politics and political vacuums, then yeah, the sort of demise of the Sunni Tehreek and these kind of groups led to a political vacuum in the Bareilwi community. So the TLP emerged, and they were fortunate to have for whatever you want to say about Khadim Rizvi, you cannot deny the fact that he was an intensely charismatic public speaker. Okay. He had the ability to, and I mean, his command over language, his command over even scripture. I mean, you can argue of how he used it, right? The devil can quote scripture to his own purpose and so on and so forth. To Iqbal, to local Punjabi colloquialisms, he's fun to listen to, man. And he appeals to that audience. And there is very much a vote bank for it. But it is not a national societal project now, and I don't see it becoming one even in the mid to long term. Okay? Because unki appeal is limited to a certain community and to urban and peri-urban regions. We have seen political Islamist parties rise, and we have seen them fall. This will fall largely into that same category. They're going to be around. They are going to make a lot of noise. They have a lot of street power. And they will, using all of that, be able to influence policy to some extent or the other. And the very fact that they exist and the very fact that they get votes, I mean, I'll just hark back to my earlier point, is that when the extreme right goes more extreme and gets support for it, then you find that the center shifts. So their talking points you will find being echoed by every party. And to one extent or the other, you do see that. We have seen that. We have seen that in the blasphemy law debates. We have seen that in the Khatm-e-Nabuwwat debates. We have seen that in the recent controversy over France. But by no means can I honestly compare that with the Sangh Parivar in India, because that is an animal of entirely different shape and size.
Agreed. It's a more grassroots movement. It has more appeal, and it is on its journey to achieving whatever social project that it is trying to achieve for the last many decades. But Pakistan mein to, that's again my question. When you said TLP it's not a larger societal project. Societal project complete nahi ho gaya. ब्लास्फेमी लॉ तो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में है, अहमदियों को गैर मुसलमान कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में है, तो अब अगला क्या होगा प्रोजेक्ट में? मतलब सुन्नी मेजॉरिटेरियन स्टेट तो बन चुका है ऑलरेडी.
It's been like that for a while now. बहुत कुछ रहता है यार, बहुत कुछ रहता है. I mean, again, are we discussing this in isolation or are we discussing this in a comparison with India?
नहीं, comparison
that is a completely different angle at work. अच्छा, in and of itself, यार ये बात पुरानी हो गई है. I see attempts being made, however isolated, at course correction. Okay, this does not mean that the laws against the Ahmadis are ever going to be repealed. That is never going to happen. That does not mean that there will be fundamental reform, and I'm using the term reform on the blasphemy law. I'm not insane that on any forum I would say कि नहीं इसको repeal करो. नहीं, ऐसे मैं पागल नहीं हूँ यार. I'm not going to say anything of that sort. But there are things that you need to put in some safeguards. And what are those safeguards? The former Chief Justice himself pointed those out. Where is the penalty for bearing false witness? Right? if you were to falsely accuse someone of blasphemy, then have you not in fact committed blasphemy yourself? Okay? Those people who attacked the temple in Karan, is that not blasphemy? You see? So there are numerous currents all flowing at the same time. Many of them have already prevailed. Fine. There's no doubt about that. But where does it go from here? Does it get more intense? I don't really know. There are attempts being made by clerics from various denominations to widen the scope of blasphemy. ठीक है? कोई एक शिया जाकिर कहेगा कि जी इन्होंने मतलब इस हस्ती के बारे में बात की है, ये भी ब्लास्फेमी है. ठीक है? On the other hand, सिपाही साहबा वाले कहेंगे कि जी इन्होंने साहबा के बारे में बात की है, ये भी ब्लास्फेमी के दायरे में आना चाहिए. So these things also go on. We had that case. Now I don't remember what town it was, but it was in Punjab where that bank guard killed the manager. Yeah. And it was a personal enmity. What was? And he went immediately and said, "Nahi ji, isne gustakhi ki hai." And immediately thousands of people came out. They're kissing his hand, they're kissing his cheek, and they're jumping up and down. Sartan se juda and all of that. They walk into the police station. They stand in the roof of the police station. But what happens eventually? Right? What happens eventually? Now that guy is under arrest. Now everyone knows that, for lack of a better term, the entire thing was BS. Having said that, one of the reasons that went down that particular road is that when they looked at the murdered bank manager's Facebook profile, it is clear that he is a Ashik Rasool. Okay, उसमें आयात है, he's condemning France, ये blasphemy, वो blasphemy. कोई और होता, अगर उज़ैर यूनुस होता तो शायद ये reaction ना आता, right? But baby steps, man, baby steps, right? So I look at that as some form of progress. Does that mean that, oh my God, spring is here? No, one swallow does not make a spring. जब मैं कोई 50-60 हजार swallows देखूंगा तो फिर मैं कहूंगा कि हाँ हो सकता है कि spring आ रही है. But this is how it is, yeah. And then by no means unique in it, man. The whole world is engaged in a pronounced rightward drift. For us, that's like, हाँ यार ये तो हमने कर भी लिया है यार.
आगे हैं थोड़ा आगे चले गए दुनिया से.
I mean, are you familiar with the term Islamo-leftism? Do you know where that comes from? Islamo-leftism is a term that has been in vogue in like sort of far-right, alt-right, neo-Nazi circles. If you go on to the discussion forums, and I have been for the better part of a decade and a half, okay, just for fun, just to see what they're talking about, they are using this term. Now you know who's using this term? The French government itself.
Yeah.
Okay. The other watching a debate between a French minister and Jean-Marie Le Pen. Okay, right? You all know Jean-Marie Le Pen is, right? For the benefit of your listeners and viewers, she is the leader of the far-right French National Front. I think it's called the National Front.
Yeah, the second most popular politician in France.
She was the second most popular politician in France. Do you know what the French minister, who was a member of Macron's government, obviously, you know what he said to her? He said, "You're too soft on Muslims." To Jean-Marie Le Pen. You're telling Jean-Marie Le Pen that, you're too soft on Muslims. That's kind of like telling Hitler कि यार तुम यहूदियों से बहुत ज़्यादा प्यार करते हो यार. हाँ, क्या हो गया है तुम्हें? Why do you think he's doing that? He may actually believe it, and I believe that he believes it. But beyond that, there are cynical political motivations. Yeah. तुम देखते शक्ल देखते तुम Jean-Marie Le Pen की वो, she was like, what? That's like you telling Yogi Adityanath कि यार मैंने तुम्हें देखा था नमाज पढ़ते हुए. हाँ, मतलब उसके होश ठिकाने आ गए थे कि यार ये क्या हो रहा है. So that is very much there. That is very much there, And when it comes to you guys, man, if you want to talk about the United States right now, there are some major inflection points approaching, right? Very soon, Caucasians are not going to be the majority, okay? That's going to be like, accumulated people of color, right? How do you think white America is reacting to that, right? Where do you think this whole take our country back, make America great again, which obviously means make America white, conservative again? That is where it comes from. And then there is something else coming, okay? Because we're all familiar with the concept of national myths, right? These are stories that we tell ourselves about who we are, where we come from. For some, it's like world's biggest secular democracy. हमारे लिए हमेशा था इस्लाम का किला, right?
Yeah.
For America, what is their single national slogan? If I were to boil it down, we're number one, right? Well, in another decade, you won't be, right? The Chinese economy, and I'm not just coming out of this on my own. There are, documented reports projecting it. By 2050, they were supposed to become the largest economy in front of the United States. Now, thanks to coronavirus and the way they handled it, initial mishandling notwithstanding, and the way America has, not handled it, right, has pushed that timeline back to 2030. How do you think America is going to react to not being number one? It's going to be a national crisis of confidence like you have never seen. And it's coming. It's not even there yet. Okay, you may want to look at Biden, Biden jeet gaya. Lekin 70% of Republicans will still vote for Trump. Despite him being a complete psycho. Okay? मतलब वो उत्ते के साथ झूठ बोलता है यार, उसकी कोई एक बात है जो सही है नहीं, yet they will support him. What happens when a slightly smarter, savvier Trump comes along? And he will come along, because what he has shown is how to marshal white America in the flyover states that nobody ever gave a rat's ass about. And these are their concerns. These are the people who believe in chemtrails. These are the people who believe that the UN is coming in black bloody helicopters to take away your guns and your pickup trucks, right? This is only beginning.
Yeah.
It has manifested itself so many times in history.
I've told this to many people who believe that sort of what you said, white America becoming the minority is a good thing for Democrats. I always argued to them that actually if the Republicans were smart and toned down just a bit on their xenophobia, their coalition of brown people would grow this much. Because you look at Muslims, look at Hindus, you look at Latinos, they're all conservative. They don't like big government. They don't like paying taxes. They are against abortion rights and they're against LGBTQ. They're not leftists. They've been forced into the leftist camp because the other side is so xenophobic and bigoted.
Absolutely right.
And a smarter Republican politician who's more populist will quickly realize, wait a minute, I can actually expand my base much, much more by appealing to these people's nativist instincts as well. And again, going back to our initial conversation about the scale and the speed of lies and the way they spread, it's a gold mine that is waiting to be tapped. And I think that's a big danger.
Yeah, Uzair, the Proud Boys already figured that out.
Yeah.
The Proud Boys aren't all white, right? Yeah. They have people of color in there. Okay. Now imagine that. I can't wrap my head around it, but imagine that. They figured it out. You see? So other people will too. That's just inevitable, and that's just good politics. And I'll give you a funny example of this, right? Now, the Israeli Jews and the Palestinians generally don't like each other, right? And if there are going to be two groups within those groups who really hate each other, those would be the ultra-Orthodox Jews, right? In Israel, I'm talking about, and the Palestinian Maulvis, the Palestinian clergy. Do you know the one issue on which they were united? This is some years back. That there should not be a gay pride rally in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
On that, they were like, hey, boss, वैसे तो मतलब दिन में जो 365 दिन है हम एक दूसरे को मारेंगे लेकिन इस बात पर हम एक है तुम हमारे भाई हो इनको हम नहीं आने देंगे. So that's very much there, and I mean again it's only really getting started, man. This is not over by a long stretch. No. Yeah. And here's the thing, things are never really over. That's the thing, okay? Like, I mean, initially you gave the example of the Peloponnesian Wars, right? Now think about this, right? Think about this. Suppose you're a Holocaust survivor, okay? And you were in a concentration camp. Post that, you moved to the United States. You saw the defeat of fascism. You saw the rise of sort of, leftist, blah, 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 more tolerance and, equality and all of that. And you're in your 90s and you actually see neo-Nazi talking points being parroted by the president, right? You see that discourse normalized to the point where people are marching in the streets, giving the Sieg Heil. How would you feel, right? Because here's the thing, and this is something that I think activists or the world over need to understand, as hard as it is. is that you will never actually win, but you have to keep fighting, right? Your victories are temporary. It is a constant war, okay? You may achieve great victories in your life, and then at the end of your life, see yourself lose. But that doesn't mean that your struggle was in vain. You know, you fought for. Sometimes you may see a victory. The victory that you wanted may come 2 generations after you're long dead and your bones are dust, right? But what you did will be remembered. It will be remembered that you stood up and you fought. You know, even if
Yeah.
you may never see victory in your lifetimes. And I think America may एक और मसला है, Uzair. And correct me if I'm wrong. This is just a theory of mine, right? It's a young nation, and thus far, its interpretation, its perception of history is linear, right? Always moving forward. The westward expansion, okay? And always has been one of victory. Okay, I mean, minor Vietnam, apni jagah. So they lost the battle, but they won the war, right? They won the Cold War, arguably. Okay, um, you won the Revolutionary Wars, you won the Indian Wars by committing genocide, but be that as it may, right? Civil War with the North Key ideology won. Spanish-American War gave you an empire, right? And then World War One, then World War II, then the Cold War, right? In the actual world, we know that history is not linear. We know that history is cyclical, right? We know that one day you're an empire and the next day you don't exist. There is nothing in American history, there is nothing in American culture, there's nothing in the American understanding that explains this to people.
I think you're
That
right.
loss.
On that, I think one of the important things that, I was watching this course from a Yale historian on the Civil War, and he said something very profound that has stuck to me as an immigrant who is now an American as well, that I did not understand up until the point that he pointed this out, was that the American way of life is basically one where the goodness of people is always in constant battle with the terrible things that people bring to the North American shores with them. He used slavery in this example, but he said, if you look at sort of the Civil War Lincoln-esque victory, it was very quickly followed by a rightward tilt after Reconstruction, which meant that
Yes,
after
yes,
Reconstruction, it took another 100 years for Black senators and congressmen to be elected from those states that won, right? There was a big wave that came. And then he said, look at President Obama, and his victory was followed by Donald Trump. Now, the cycles are shrinking because just the way the world moves now. But
that's
he was
correct.
like, we are going through the second reaction to the fact that the Black man became president. And to your point, you're absolutely right that the victory is never fully there. But that's why institutions, constitutions, and norms are very important, because they act as safeguards. Because
Yeah,
it's hard, even for a Trump-like incompetent person with advisors that sort of knew the system. It's very hard. McConnell can shove through judicial appointees, but the norms of the institution will still force the judicial appointees to say, wait a minute, there was no steal here. You guys are batshit crazy. Even though you appointed me, I'm going to rule against you.
yeah,
And I think
yeah.
that will be the test, right? We're going through a stress test of institutions globally, and
That is
whether
the
these
test.
survive or not is a
That
question.
is that is the test. Yeah, that is the test. Look, institutions are crucial, man. Institutions are crucial. Because what you talk about, that's still going on. I mean, recently in Georgia, I was reading that in Georgia, they've banned, they said, look, they can't be any voting on Sundays. Now, there's a reason for that. It's because
Yeah.
most of the African Americans, they don't own their own transport. They work jobs, so they can't take time off to go and stand in a long line and vote. So the black churches, which, as you know, they get together on Sunday, and then
Yeah.
they put their parishioners on buses and they take them voting, right? So this is voter suppression. It's going on right now. It's 2021. Civil war kab ki baat thi, you know? So there's a constant push and pull. There's a constant struggle. I would be lying if I were to say that I'm certain how things are going to turn out. But I see the downward trends as being more pronounced than the upward trends, and especially when I factor in things like climate change, especially when I factor in, global economic downturns, environmental degradation, right?
Yeah.
All,
No, I
all of
can
this.
hear you.
Sorry, my Adobe Flash player just suddenly
Yeah,
wants
no.
me to. Let me
Um,
just in a way, yeah. So when I factor all of that in, right, I see crises, and whenever there are crises, as a general rule, it is a rightist ideology that emerges from them. I've very rarely seen a progressive ideology emerge from crisis. I think mostly the overall sweep of history is in that direction. Again, who knows? The tyranny of the present, right? We live in these times, so we think that they cannot be ever be different. Maybe it might be. I would hope that it might be. My heart says it should be. My brain says nahi hone wala hai.
I think one area where I will again push back, I know you mentioned this, China being number one. I think while a lot of the Western democracies have gone through, and in the Western democracies, I would include even Japan, have gone through economic and political stagnation and the stress test overall. China still to face a stress test anywhere close to something it faced after the Cultural Revolution. And I think the consolidation of power that has happened there under Xi,
Yeah.
and I am not a China expert, but I loosely understand its system,
I'm not
is
either.
going to bring about a stress test for that economy and for that country as a whole. And I think that will be, again, authoritarian regimes are really muscular and really strong on the outside, but really
But
hollow and weak
also
on the
brittle.
inside, very brittle. And when that stress test comes, and I think that's where a lot of my conversations with
Yeah,
folks in
no,
the
no, no. I
US
mean, look,
go,
that's entirely.
is going to be interesting to see. How does China react to its own internal cleavages? We don't know yet.
Yeah, that is a big unknown. That is no doubt a big unknown. But then we also must not lose sight of one thing, right? Is that China isn't a country. China is a civilization. Okay, and I mean, you're looking at 5,000 years of history here, and you have seen a nation that has gone through unimaginable crises. And yet here it is. And I mean, let's give the devil his due. The amount of people they have lifted out of poverty, I think there is no precedent for that in human history. Okay. I remember I came across this really, you'd enjoy this. I'll try to find it for you. I came across this really interesting report from the 1970s. And they're confidently predicting that there's going to be a big problem because there's going to be a famine in China and millions of people, hundreds of millions of people are going to be starving and it's going to create instability all over the world. How are we going to deal with that? Look at them now in 2021. So yeah, and it's also very hard to really predict anything about China because this whole system is so opaque, right? You really don't know. I mean, I can't. You certainly. I mean, I don't think either of us can, with confidence, say what exact internal stresses and pressures there are. Which is why I think that Xi Jinping in particular is sort of promoting this aggressive Han nationalism, because you need a myth to sell to people, right? So I think this is the myth that he's selling. And so long as successes keep coming in, it's an easy myth to sell. The big, I think one of the great unknowns of our time is how they would react to an actual crisis. I think that will be the true litmus test. Let's again, we'll only know when it actually happens.
Yeah, and I think speaking of predictions that go wrong, I remember even from the 50s, 60s, there were lots of Western predictions that India would splinter and balkanization. That's a later term, but basically that's what was being described, was that there were famines, food shortages, the economy was stagnant. The famous Hindu rate of growth became the term of choice for decades. And look where we are, it hasn't splintered at all.
Yeah.
In fact, has become a pretty strong, innovative economy. But yeah, these types of predictions, I think when people make these predictions, I'm like, I don't know, I can tell you what the tests will be. And then choices determine what comes out of this, right? And what type of reforms come out to respond to that crisis are important.
Yeah, there's so many variables, I mean, you cannot, I would avoid confidently predict कि यार 10 साल बाद ये होने वाला है. You know what I mean? You can say कि यार these are the various possibilities, and I know how wishy-washy that sounds कि यार ये भी हो सकता है लेकिन ये भी हो सकता है ये ना हो. But that's how it is, right? It would be dishonest to really say anything else.
10 साल पहले हम पैंडेमिक की बात तो नहीं कर रहे होंगे 2011 में.
यार वो pandemic की आपने बात की तो that brings me to an interesting point. There was this infographic, I'm sure you've seen it, you know, things that didn't age well category में आता है वो. Right before the pandemic, when the pandemic started, they did this sort of color-coded map of the world, and they were like, these are the countries that are best geared to deal with it, and these are the countries that are worst geared to deal with it. You look at it now, and you can flip it over. They were like, the UK and the US are best geared to deal with it. Well, guess what, right?
Yeah.
They were like, yeah, China, ye kharab ho jayega, ye ho jayega, but look what they did, right? Pakistan is on the list of just going to fall apart, blah, blah, blah. Well, in your face, man. Huh? We're still standing. Look at you. You know?
Yeah.
So I mean, it's a difficult thing, man. It's a difficult thing, you know. I'd be very wary of making any like confident predictions. You know, बाद में कोई ये clip निकाल के आ गया तुम्हें तो पता ही नहीं.
2020 की
You know what I
वर्ल्ड
mean?
बैंक की अर्ली 2020 वर्ल्ड बैंक की प्रेडिक्शन थी ग्लोबल रेमिटेंस फ्लोज विल डिक्लाइन बाय अ क्वार्टर और फिलीपींस पाकिस्तान इंडिया बांग्लादेश मेक्सिको के हालात खराब होने वाले हैं बिकॉज दे नीड रेमिटेंसेस वो हर जगह बूम हुई है रेमिटेंसेस एंड पीपल आर स्टिल स्ट्रगलिंग टू एक्सप्लेन
Exactly.
what happened there.
Yeah.
Essentially, we all
Yeah. Nobody
underestimated
understands
informal
that.
flow of money. Like basically जितने
Yeah.
इकोनॉमिस्ट थे उन्होंने इनफॉर्मल फ्लो को काउंट नहीं किया और वो फॉर्मलाइज हो गया तो पता चला कि भाई 10-12-15% पे ग्रोथ चल रही है.
वो कहते हैं ना कि हर एक चीज के साथ नीचे लिखना चाहिए शरायत और ज़वाबित लागू है. You know,
Speaking of
could be
predictions,
totally wrong. Who knows?
speaking of predictions, last before I let you go, this has been a wonderful discussion. लेकिन थोड़ा सियासत और मिर्च मसाले की बात predictions पे ना हो तो सुबह का नाश्ता पूरा हजम नहीं होता. मार्च में इलेक्शन है सेनेट के पाकिस्तान में शोर शराबा बहुत चल रहा है क्या आई थिंक इट्स जस्ट अ स्टॉर्म इन अ टी का फजूल की वो है शोर शराबा चल रहा है व्हाट डू यू थिंक अबाउट ऑल दैट्स हैपनिंग
Yeah, what I'm finding interesting is the level of panic I'm seeing in the government. Okay, there is considerable panic in the government. I mean, what that seems to indicate. Look, I'm always like the sort of cynic, and I'm always like the naysayer in this. Okay, and you know, मेरा हमेशा ये था कि यार नहीं PDM का कुछ नहीं होने वाला. And when I say कुछ नहीं होने वाला, I mean कि like obviously the maximalist objective of getting rid of the PM, that's never going to happen. But it does seem to me that they have achieved one thing, and that is to get the establishment to at least temporarily back off from one or two things. जैसे अभी ये जो डस्का में हुआ है, right? This is not Rawalpindi. This is not, I don't even think Islamabad. It may be from Lahore, but I personally think कि ये जो हुआ है ना, has happened on a very local level. Now, if the establishment was fully saying, sir, we will handle your senators for you, the PTI would not be panicking. They have already been through this before when some of their guys went over to the Pakistan People's Party. I mean, whether they listen to the voice of their conscience or whether they listen to, stacks and stacks of notes, that's another story entirely. But the very fact that they have brought in their big guns, sort of Jahangir Tareen is back in the field, various other things are going on. It does seem to indicate to me that they are sensing trouble, and particularly this whole like sort of drama that they've done with the, putting in the ordinance and then going to the Supreme Court. I don't think any of it is going to come to anything, but it speaks to panic. So it would be interesting, I think, to try and unpack why there is this panic. I mean, after all, आप तो one page पर हैं, आपको तो कोई ऐसा challenge ही नहीं है, आपको तो कोई हटा नहीं सकता, तो फिर इतनी tension क्यों? It's a question.
I think you're right that the establishment probably is saying we don't want to get involved in this. Do your thing, run your own politics, and I think the ruling party is in a panic because it's realized that it is not as good as running with politics as it would like to be, and there is a lot of discontent among allies and among the less ideological supporters of the PTI within the party itself, and that means there's room for wheeling and dealing. And you can be, a lot of people on social media, etc., are all, moralistic and idealistic about it. And I'm like, dude, I sit here in the United States. This is how it works. We're talking about bringing pork back into the system, in the congressional system, which was eliminated a few years ago because it helped move. It was the grease that moved the wheels along of the legislature. Right. And there are things, each democracy, even an authoritarian government has its own ways of greasing the system and moving things along. And if you don't pay attention to those, things will get stuck and people will come back at you when they can.
Yeah, these people think that the world is an Alif Laila ki kahani, na? Right? They live in a fairy tale.
Yeah.
And this is not the oasis of the imagined, yeah. This is the desert of the real. This
Yeah.
is how it works here.
Yeah.
Not much
So
you can
we'll
do about
see. I think they will just get over the hurdle, but it will be a fun ride while we're at it. And I think
it.
even a
Yeah, I know.
best case scenario doesn't really help them a lot.
No, it really doesn't. It's not. I mean, again, coming back to your original Storm in a Teacup, not much is really going to change, but it's going to be fun to watch while it's happening.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we do, right? We
Yeah.
sit, we watch, we try to amuse us.
And we will watch your analysis with Musad Saab and Mubashir Saab, particularly with Musad Saab's tongue-in-cheek
No,
sarcasm that sometimes goes above people's head, and it takes, even for
yeah,
me as a regular watcher, it takes a couple of minutes sometimes to get what his intended meaning was, but he's really good with that type of play. So I think I'm a big fan of the show, and thank you so much for joining us for this discussion. It was great. I think we covered a whole
you're
host of
welcome, man.
topics,
Thank you for having me.
broadly speaking, but thank you so much and have a great rest of the day.